Hey, I'm Alex Ralke from BoardGameCo, and today I want to talk about, well, this is a topic I've been wanting to talk about for a while, but I kept pushing it off because there's always something to talk about, really. I mean, one of the things I worried about when going to a daily video was how I would keep having things to discuss, and, well, between Kickstarter, whatever games are going on, my monthly Purge video, and all that stuff, there's really always something to discuss. And today what we want to talk about, or what I want to talk about, is how to save money in board games. What are the fastest ways that you can be involved in this hobby, getting as many games as possible, while also being conscientious of the money being spent, and potentially saving yourself, well, unnecessary expenditures, or just getting things cheaper or whatnot. And these are all five of these, well, four of these, I'll explain what I mean in a second, all four of these are things I've been doing since day one in the hobby, literally since day one. And I'll go through what I mean, different things I've done, but these are just things I've been doing since I first got into board games, and as soon as I realized that I was quickly spending $500 a month on board games when I first got sucked into, well, all of this. And the fifth one is about Kickstarter, and I only really got into Kickstarter around, 2.5, 3 years ago, and maybe a little less than that, I don't even know by now. Yeah, somewhere in that range, 2.5, 3 years ago. And so the fifth one is Kickstarter specific, so I can't say I've been doing it all those times. And the very first one, timestamps down below if you want to skip to any particular one, or honestly, you can probably read the timestamps and get, 90% of the idea right there and move on. But if you want to stick around for the conversation, if you want to hear them expounded upon, given examples, talk about them more, really just hanging out with me, well then, come on along for the ride. And starting with number one, we have stop buying new games. Now, I don't mean new in shrink games, although we'll get to that later, but I mean stop buying new games. Games that were just released, the latest hotness. You've just seen that Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion is released and you want to get your hands on it right away, and that actually might be an exception, which I'll explain shortly. But maybe, I don't know, what's the current hotness? I lose track these days. But whatever the current hotness is, something comes out, people are raving about it, you see it on your Facebook feed, you see it in your board game groups, you want it, and so you go out and buy it. You ever notice how 3 months later, 80%, 90% of those games no one seems to care about anymore? There are some that make it, don't get me wrong. But 80-90% of those games, no one seems to care about after those first 3 months. Games go through a cycle. Everything is always hot. Everything is always interesting. But which ones last? And Man vs. Meeple actually just put out a video, a chit-chat episode, which is great. I'll link to it down below. I haven't done that in a while, but it was really a fun episode to watch. But it basically was talking about the idea of modern classics, of games that made it, games that were hot and stick around and will keep being referenced. Those are great games. But the rest are good games, to be sure, nothing wrong with them, but do you really need every single good game in your collection? And so something I did for a long time, which is a little harder for me now because I'm more into this YouTube thing and the reviewing cycle, and it does change my priorities, but something I did for years is I didn't get new games at first. When something came out, unless it was by a designer I loved, unless it was an expansion or a spiritual successor such as Rising Sun, and even that possibly should have been an exception, but I didn't get new hot games. Spirit Island, Terraforming Mars, and Blood Rage, some of my favorite games of all time, are games I waited for. I didn't get Blood Rage till like 2 years after it came out. I waited. I was not interested in giving this a shot right away. Terraforming Mars as well. Everyone is raving about this game. They were going crazy. I ignored it because the hotness goes away. And Spirit Island, the game that got me into solo games, I ignored. And now that I'm thinking about this, maybe the fact that I ignored these three is not the best testament to this strategy because I love all these games. But the flip side is, I'm pointing to these three because I've kept these three. Do you know how many games I've gotten that I haven't kept? If I want to pull something to the table, it has to be something that was actually good, that made it. And so in general, when you see a new game, when you see everyone sharing photos of the latest game they just got because it was just released, give it a few months. If they're still sharing photos, sure, go ahead and get it. But if they aren't, it's usually because the game was good, but not amazing. Not great, and certainly not worth hunting down and buying at full price because you're not even waiting for a sale. Speaking of which, the longer you wait, the more they'll be on sale, which we'll talk about more. Number two, whenever you are on the fence about a Kickstarter, tell yourself you're not backing it. Walk away and see how that influences you. Now, this is the one that is the newer reason, which I had to apply to my Kickstarter addiction as soon as that started out. But the basic idea isn't really that hard to understand. The idea is, if you are on the fence, and so often we are on the fence, I'm on the fence, a lot of the time. And I'm not even talking about the value aspect. The value aspect is something, obviously, if you watch my channel. I'm talking literally just about my personal desire for the game. Because just because something I can sell for as much as I pay for it doesn't mean I'm going to. And my goal with Kickstarter, or with any games, is not to make money on the flipping of Kickstarters, rather just to not lose money. And so with Kickstarter, whenever I'm looking at a game that I'm in any way on the fence about, I hit cancel my pledge and I walk away. And then I see. Do I have second thoughts? Do I not? Sometimes I do, by the way. Sometimes I'm like, you know what? I really want that game. And then I jump back into the Kickstarter, or maybe a late pledge if it's long enough, and that's fine. I don't mind giving myself things that I want. But more often than not, when I say no to something I'm on the fence about, I almost feel a relief. I'm like, you know what? That's good. Maybe I'll check it out later if the reviews hold up down the road. There's a form of mental release as soon as you give up that game. Now, there is an exception to this, which is the idea that if something has an early bird pledge and you don't want to lose that, then sometimes it's a little hard and you kind of have to keep your $1 pledge in case you're on the fence. At the same time, that could also be its own form of influence. If, just recently with Planet Apocalypse, Return to Planet Apocalypse, I specifically dropped my pledge once I decided I was out, even though I thought the game was great. Once I decided I didn't need another game like that in my collection, and I was mentally out, I hit cancel my pledge specifically so that if new things came out, I wasn't pulled back in. And which helped, by the way, because new things came out and I did want to be pulled back in. But in general, if you're on the fence with a Kickstarter, I do recommend walking away. Don't set a reminder, don't worry about it, don't care about it, don't think about it. And if you cared enough about it, you'll probably find yourself changing your mind. The next time it pops up in that Facebook group, the next time you're browsing Kickstarter and you see it, the next time you're watching my weekly Monday roundup of Kickstarters and I talk about it, if you cared enough, you'll probably jump back in, and that's fine. That will tell you something in and of itself. It's kind of like when you're presented with 2 flavors of ice cream. You're like, do you want ice cream A or do you want ice cream B? As soon as you choose, sometimes it gives you more guidance that you really wanted the other thing. And that's true here as well. And so instead of accidentally choosing to back a Kickstarter and then regretting it, why don't you accidentally choose not to back a Kickstarter and see if you get pushed in the other direction? Reason number 3, tip number 3, and this is, by the way, if you want to skip, there's going to be some self-promotion in tips number 3 and 5. In tips 3 and 5, I'm going to talk about BoardGameCo. If you've been watching this channel enough, then you know that I don't push my business at all. I keep them pretty separate because, honestly, I don't want to dump a 30-second ad into every single one of these videos. I love the content I'm doing here, and if you want to stop by BoardGameCo and buy a game, excellent. If you just want to hang around for the conversation, the Kickstarter coverage, that's great too. So hopefully I've built up enough goodwill that you understand that I don't mindlessly push BoardGameCo on you. But tips 3 and 5 will certainly have a degree of that. So tip number 3, find a way to monetize your unplayed games. Basically, I mean, you've watched my videos, you know my collection, overturn and whatnot. If you have games on the shelf that you don't see yourself playing, and you're not like a collector, meaning if you're a collector, if you literally just want shelves full of games you're not playing, by all means, you do you. But if you just have those games because you haven't figured out a way around it, find a way to monetize your unplayed games. Go on BoardGameGeek and start a trade. Go to your local game store, sell your games. Go to a Facebook group, sell your games on a Facebook group. Or, self-promotion, come to BoardGameCo and trade your games with us or sell your games to us. If you have games sitting on your shelf and you don't value the fact that they're sitting on your shelf, but you just let them sit on your shelf because you don't have another option on the table that you've been utilizing, well, I mean, listen, if you have tons of money and you don't care, by all means, go for it. But if you'd like to turn those games into something else, do what I do. Do what so many others do. Not everyone, by the way. Many don't do this. But eventually, at a certain point, whether it's because of space, whether it's because of money, or whether it's just because you have that mindset, turn your unplayed games into other games by selling or trading them. Why in the world would you simply just keep deadweight on your shelf? And there's whether it's a KonMari approach, whether it's just being a minimalistic, thing, or whatever it is, if you have games that you're not playing, I don't know why you're keeping them, again, collector aside. So yeah, go to BoardGameGeek, trade on BoardGameGeek, trade with BoardGameCo, sell on your local Facebook group, or sell to BoardGameCo. BoardGameCo, not Crow. Now, I will say, in general, I've talked about this in previous videos, in general, if you can find a peer-to-peer trade or sale, very often you will get more out of it. It's the nature of the beast. If you come to BoardGameCo, it's less effort, it's less effort on your end for less return. But if they're sitting on your shelf doing nothing, just find a way to do something. It's worth it. This is this has been a huge part of the hobby for me since I started. The whole reason BoardGameCo started was because I couldn't stand the idea that I was just sitting on games that were doing nothing for me, and I wanted to find a way to flip them, to turn them around and turn them into another game that I could play instead. Tip number 4, don't get games that you aren't playing right away. And it doesn't mean, and I just did a video on top 10 unplayed games, and I had 60 unplayed games, And this might sound like a contradiction to that, but I'll explain shortly. But before we get into my own explanation of my own habits, the general tip is don't get games that you aren't anticipating the possibility of playing right away. It's not a commitment. It doesn't mean you have to, as soon as you buy 5 games, it doesn't mean you have to play every single one. But if you know that you're unlikely to play some of them for 3, 6, 9 months, then why are you getting it now? Why? What's the reason? What's the upside? What's the incentive? Like, just wait until you think it's reasonable that you'll play it. Now, I just did this recently with both On Mars, Barrage, and Tricarion. Those are all 3 games that I had the opportunity to get my hands on, and I was like, I want them. But I also have 3 Vital Lacerda games on my shelf unplayed. Barrage is kind of also a heavy Euro game. I have a lot of those unplayed. Tricarion, I'd rather get Anachrony to the table first. If I know that a game isn't going to fit into my mental mind map of a game that gets played sooner rather than later, I usually try to avoid it. And contrast that with Cosmic Colonies. Cosmic Colonies is a light little polyomino style game that I do plan on getting my hands on because those games will hit the table pretty quickly. I anticipate that when I get that game, it'll probably hit the table within the first month of me having it, and so I'm happy to get another game. And in general, when I go through my unplayed games, I do find it's the heavier games, the heaviest ones that are the biggest portion of my unplayed games. And so that's a factor when I choose what to get. But if I have a bunch of games, again, I just went through a list of top 10 games I really want to play, and those should take precedence over most of the new stuff. Kickstarter is a bit of an exception because that's a time-sensitive thing, but all too often with many of these things, I sit there and try to think through, is this game realistically hitting the table soon? And if not, don't get it. Now, as far as why I have 60 unplayed games, there's 2 explanations. First of all, some of them are just me making bad decisions. Sometimes at the end of the day, I do get a game that I thought I would get to the table, and, well, not I thought. Sometimes I get a game where I still wanted it and I made the wrong choice. That happens. I'm not always perfect at this. I do frequently, keep in mind, by the way, I have access, because of BoardGameCo, I have access to a lot of games. And I frequently say no to games that I technically own because of this reason. And then secondly is, many of these games, while I anticipate getting them played soon, it doesn't always happen. Because I'm not saying commit to playing them soon. I'm just saying, if you know it's not happening, don't waste your time. If you think it's going to happen, get it. And maybe it won't. And that's fine. I'm trying to think of a game here. Let's say Yellow and Yangtze is a game on my shelf that I did think I would get to the table pretty quickly. Time has gone on, and I haven't. I still plan on. I just played Tigers and Euphrates again. Great game. That's basically tip number 4. Don't get games that you know aren't hitting the table anytime soon. And lastly, tip number 5 is look for deals. Always look for deals. Unless you really need a game, this goes hand in hand with 4, unless you really need a game today, don't buy games unless there's some form of deal, incentive, or something on the table. Now, for Kickstarter, like we talked about, it's time-sensitive stuff. It's if I think a Kickstarter is a good deal, I get it. If I don't, I wait. That's the whole point. It's right there already. But then other things to do is, and I'll have links to all these down below, but go to Board Game Prices when you buy games, because Board Game Prices shows you the prices of a bunch of stores, not every store, but a whole lot of stores are on there, so you can price compare what's available. I'll have a link down below, and again, disclaimer, we're on there. Board Game Atlas also has a price comparison. It's actually owned by the same person, but if you have a preference for one or the other, both of them have price comparison tools. Sign up on Board Game Geek forums. Sign up for the deals forum on Board Game Geek. You'll get little notifications when someone says, oh, you know, Amazon's having a lightning deal on Terraforming Mars for $32. So you'll get notified. You'll be able to sit there and have this list of games that you want, this list of games that's in your backlog, and yes, the list of games that are a good deal and you know you won't play that soon, but that is an exception to point number 4, which is if you get a good enough deal, by all means, get it now. Go to Board Game Marketplace. You can sign up. You can subscribe to any individual game on Board Game Geek, and you'll get a flag when it pops up in the marketplace. Used copies sometimes on Board Game Geek Marketplace are a good deal. Sometimes they're not, but you can make that decision accordingly. But check out used games. Used games can be a great source of saving money. Speaking of used games, check out BoardGameCo. If you head to our website, BoardGameCo, we have used games frequently. I mean, it's not like huge savings, but if you load up a cart of $100 worth of stuff or whatnot, get free shipping, you'll frequently be saving a pretty decent amount compared to your local game store, Amazon, Cool Stuff Inc., or whatever. Used games can be a great way to save money. I've been buying them since day one. In fact, another one I'll link down below is a company called One-Eyed Jock. They're based in, I think, Virginia, but it's one of the first places that I bought games from when I got into the hobby. They have ding and dent selections, and I bought probably my first, I don't know, $2,000 worth of purchases in this hobby were primarily One-Eyed Jock. They had good selections, great prices, because it was all ding and dent stuff. It wasn't used, it was just, you know, a box with a dent in the corner. And so often look for those opportunities to get something cheaper, unless of course you care. If you care enough about being in shrink, if you care enough about the box being pristine, fine. But if you're looking to try to get more gaming bang for your limited buck, these are all good options. And then lastly, I'll link to another site called onlineboardgamedeals.com, which I'll link down below. And that's a site that it's basically it's an Amazon tracking comparison thing for board games. But all of those things in options 5, all the things I just mentioned, again, board game prices, board game atlas, board game geek marketplace, board game geek deals forum, BoardGameCo, and online board game deals, I'll mention them all down below, links to everything. Those are all great ways to be aware of getting games cheaper, to be aware of the ways you can save money on board games, getting the stuff you like, but saving on the margins, frequently and consistently. It's a huge part of the hobby for me. And those are basically everything. I'll just go through them, a quick run through again. Stop buying new games. Don't buy games until they are vetted as being good, not good, until they are vetted as being great games. You don't need everything new. It's going to be a little bit of FOMO you're going to have to deal with, but you don't need everything new unless you just don't care. Don't buy new games. Tell yourself you're not backing a Kickstarter. Walk away and see if you care. And I'm not saying to do this if you really want it. If you really want it, you really want it. But if you're unsure, if you have any doubt, walk away and see how much you care. Tip number 3, find a way to monetize your unplayed games. It's going to help. Unless you're keeping everything unless you love everything you play, you need to find a way to do that, or it'll just help you cycle. It'll help you get more for your dollar. Number 4 is don't get games that you know aren't hitting the table anytime soon. And finally 5, be aware and look for deals. Again, those are mostly just, in the timestamps down below. If you just want the titles, it'll tell you everything else, but then we couldn't talk, and that's really fun, isn't it? I should probably sound more excited when I say that's really fun, isn't it? In any case, I'm Alex Radcliffe from BoardGameCo. I hope you in some way found this video useful. It's been one that I've been wanting to make for a long time. Like I said, it falls into this cycle of just trying to do other stuff. And also, as much as I think these are useful tips, I am wary of self-promotion on this channel. I'm wary of... I like to think that I'm direct and genuine about a lot of things. And I am very wary about this channel turning into a tool where I just promote BoardGameCo on a regular, frequent basis. It will happen. It'll happen when it's relevant and when I think it's genuinely an asset, but it will not happen other than that. Of course, the regular link. I'm losing track here. I am Alex Radcliffe from BoardGameCo. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, I hope you have a good one.